Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Secretary and General, for your service, for your appearance today. Special thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your recent trip to Minot, and please thank Leah as well. It was an exceptional day for the airmen and missileers in Minot, and I hope you took something away from it as well. And since we're on the topic, and since the,
And I went there in the winter. So.
Well, the fact you came in February does add to your street cred, without a doubt. But you also got to see them at their best in the toughest conditions, working with some very old equipment, as you noticed, no doubt. Some very old airplanes, flown and maintained by some very young airmen, and some very old missiles maintained by some very young missileers. And so we appreciate the priority of modernization, obviously. And with regard to the missiles specifically, you know, ever since the GBSD has been on, you know, on the planning board, I've pressed pretty hard about the timeline, and particularly knowing there are detractors here and there, and of course the, you know, the lack of competitive RFP added to that. If you could just give an update on GBSD, the progress, and what you see, if any, challenges there might be, and what, you know, what risks we run if there is a delay.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, it's we continue to move forward on GBSD. It's vitally important as the land-based leg of the triad, as you know. What concerns me most is the same thing that I discussed with Senator Fisher, is we have no margin left with regard to the timeline. It's utterly important that we move out quickly. I share your concerns about lack of competition, so we're going to have to be very clever, and Undersecretary Lord is working out a number of ways by which we keep the pressure on the contractor to stick to cost and stick to performance and timeline to schedule associated with that, because there is no margin with regard to replacing that. We tend to have this recapitalization problem coming all together at around the same time. But that said, I'm also looking for ways to build margin in that leg of the triad. Are there different things we can do to extend it? And then, as you know, I have personal concern after speaking to folks there, is to make sure we maintain the health and vitality and readiness of the missile force itself. A very important mission and a very tough mission when you have a chance to get down one of those silos and experience what they go through.
It is that. General Milley, with regard to this, I think the Secretary referred to the divest of some of the things of the past to invest in things of the future. We hear a lot lately in this budget about the risk associated with you know, getting from here to there, and the divestiture of some of those legacy systems. You know, one of the things that comes up often, of course, is the ISR demands in the theater. I think pretty much every combatant commander I've talked to says we're woefully short, and yet some of the legacy systems that are being targeted for retirement to make room for modernization include some very important ISR assets. And I'd be interested in sort of your take on all that, if you're comfortable with for example, Global Hawk future, MQ-9, whether the risk is worth it or what the risk might even be.
Well, it depends on.
You're off.
Depends on what adversary or enemy you're talking about. So many of the ISR systems that we have today that are in very high demand are very, very useful against terrorists, insurgents, against fixed sites, et cetera. And they have clear penetration capability when there's no significant air defense threat or there's no other types of threats. If you're talking about great power competition, which is what this NDS talks about and what this budget is all about, that's a different type of ISR. So we're trying to divest ourselves of the ISR that is not particularly useful against a Russia or China, or even high-dense air defense systems of an Iran or a North Korea, and invest in those ISR systems that do have penetration capability. And that's why you see some of the divest in order to invest. There's no need, it makes no sense to me to continue to buy stuff that isn't in alignment with the NDS. So it's a depends question on what your enemy is. With respect to the quantity or capacity relative to the COCOMs, you'll never find a combatant commander who has enough ISR. It's just not going to happen. We have been every single year, year in and year out, for 20 years, always been short of ISR. We continue to build it. You're never going to buy your way out of the problem because it has to do with information and having to do with knowledge and decision making. So we will always be chronically short of ISR. But the key, though, for the divest to invest is it depends on who you're going against. And we need to invest in the capabilities that are worthwhile against a China or a Russia.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.